John Wayne Gacy, a man whose public smile became the mask for unthinkable darkness, a man who hosted neighborhood parties, entertained children as a clown, and buried bodies beneath his own home. To his neighbors, he was a businessman, a volunteer, a man who made people laugh. To his victims, he was a nightmare wrapped in the mask of a clown. Gacy wasn't defined by a costume. He was defined by a lifelong war with his own identity, a conflict between who he was, who he pretended to be, and who he feared becoming. But monsters like Gacy are not born overnight. They are built slowly, through trauma, insecurity, rage, and the desperate need to hide who they really are. Today, we remove the mask. We step inside the mind of a killer who lived two lives, one for the world and one for the graves beneath his feet. Childhood. Gacy's childhood wasn't defined by neglect. It was defined by fear. Born in 1942 into a working-class home in Chicago, his father was an alcoholic, emotionally unpredictable, and violently abusive. Gacy was constantly belittled, called weak, told he wasn't a real man. His mother tried to protect him, but this only made his father hate him more. For a young boy, this created a deadly psychological cocktail: shame, plus fear, plus the constant need to seek approval. His father, a strict, violent, alcoholic man who believed emotions were weakness. His mother, gentle, protective, too protective for a father obsessed with toughness. Every time young Gacy cried or showed vulnerability, his father beat him repeatedly, yet Gacy still craved his affection. Every time he tried to please him, his father rejected him. So Gacy learned two lessons. 1. Pain is private. 2. Approval must be earned. He spent his childhood desperate for validation that never came. The result? A fractured identity built on shame, fear, and the constant need to be liked. He developed intense insecurity, low self-worth, desire for validation at any cost, emotional dependence on authority figures. This is the root of the two Gacys, the one who wanted approval and the one who wanted control. Adolescence. As Gacy grew older, the cracks widened. He struggled with health issues, causing him to miss school and fall behind. He was bullied and isolated. His father continued to call him worthless, weak, and not man enough. Gacy also began to realize he was attracted to men. But in the 1950s, this discovery was a source of shame, especially in a home ruled by a hyper-masculine, violent father. So Gacy learned to hide who he was, not just in terms of intimacy, emotionally, psychologically. Gacy didn't develop a stable sense of self. Instead, he developed multiple versions of himself, none of which were authentic. This identity fragmentation is critical. It explains how he could live a double life without psychological collapse. He compartmentalized. He separated the acceptable self from the forbidden self. And with time, that separation became absolute. He developed a survival mechanism that would define his adult crimes. He became a performer. He learned how to smile on the outside while collapsing on the inside. Every smile he wore was a shield, every joke a distraction, every gesture of kindness another layer on the mask. This was the birth of the mask. Early adulthood. In his 20s and early 30s, Gacy began constructing the perfect public self. He joined community organizations, hosted parties, built a business, became a respected figure in the neighborhood, married and built a family. A man who entertained children as Pogo the Clown. He became the man everyone liked, but underneath the surface, he struggled with identity, repressed sexual desires, deep resentment, rage built from childhood humiliation. He constructed a hypersocial persona to hide the internal void. This wasn't confidence, it was camouflage. The more admiration he received, the more fragile he became. Because admiration fed the mask, not the man underneath. This tension between public approval and private urges grew unbearable. Gacy described it as two people living in the same body. One wanted to be loved, the other wanted control. Escalation. Gacy's crimes emerged from three psychological forces. 1. Repressed desire. He couldn't reconcile his sexual identity with his internal shame. 2. Control reversal. He turned past victimization into present domination. 3. Emotional detachment. Victims were symbols, not people, representations of the desires he denied. Gacy's crawl space became the physical manifestation of his psyche, dark, compartmentalized, hidden, decomposing. When the mask began to crack, the violence surfaced. Gacy lured young men and boys with promises of work, money, or alcohol. He used handcuffs as a magic trick to gain control. Once restrained, he assaulted and murdered them. Many victims were buried in the crawl space beneath his house. The crawl space became a physical symbol of Gacy's psychological world. Dark, hidden, compressed, suffocating. With each victim, Gacy felt more powerful, less ashamed, more in control of his inner chaos, more like the man his father always told him he wasn't. But the need never went away. It grew. The same way his father claimed dominance over him, Gacy now exerted dominance over others, reversing the roles he had suffered as a child. The deep psychological breakdown. At the core, Gacy suffered from narcissistic personality disorder traits, inflated self-image, demand for admiration, lack of empathy, manipulation, identity diffusion. He had no unified self-concept. Sexual sadism elements, control. Emotional satisfaction. Displaced rage. Every attack was a reenactment of past humiliation. Gacy's pathology wasn't created overnight. It was engineered through decades of repression, shame, and performance. Gacy's mind revolved around three broken pillars. 1. Identity split. Gacy lived two lives, the community man, the predator. He compartmentalized his cruelty to protect his public persona. This dissociation allowed him to kill without psychologically confronting what he was doing. 2. Power through control. Every humiliation he endured as a child became fuel for dominance. He recreated the dynamic of abuse, but this time, he played the role of the aggressor. 3. Repression and rage. Gacy's inability to accept his sexuality combined with lifelong shame created explosive tension. Violence became his release valve. Control became his addiction. Psychologists often describe Gacy as a man who murdered the parts of himself he could not accept. Conclusion. John Wayne. Gacy wasn't just a man with a mask. He was a man made entirely from masks, each one built to hide a different wound. His story is a reminder that monsters can smile, shake your hand, host your community event, and then return home to a crawl space filled with secrets. Gacy didn't kill to destroy others. He killed to destroy the parts of himself he feared the most. And now the question for you. Which is more terrifying? A killer driven by desire or a killer driven by shame? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.